thank you all again for joining our second session here. Again, my name is Chris Woodall. I'm the manager of long range planning for the city of Lexington. We're putting on this ADU conference in conjunction with the city of Louisville. And so we appreciate you all being here. I do want to thank our next panelists. This is going to be the first of 4 industry technical sessions. We've got with us today Bryce Jahner, who's the executive director of construction and new markets at Haven Construction in Durham, North Carolina. And so his session is going to be, how might the design and construction industry benefit from the niche market that ADUs provide? We're going to hear the answer along with other industry insights from an experienced residential designer and builder who is turning this newly available product into a sustainable business model. So Bryce leads Haven's business and development and new ventures. He's a serial social entrepreneur, starting several companies both in the United States and Uganda. With 20 plus years of industry experience, he's been a project lead on a diverse range of project sizes, budgets, and complexities. Driven by his diverse work experiences, Bryce strives to bring innovation to real estate development, share his expertise with others, and produce long-term durable change. So we've got Bryce with us here. I want to remind everybody out in attendance that there's a Q&A function. And as things come to your mind, I'd like you to go ahead and type your questions in for Bryce. We're going to have about 10 to 15 minutes at the conclusion of his presentation to cover some of those questions that you all have. So I know there's going to be a lot of them, and we'll do our best to cover them all. We're also going to do our best to be respectful of your time. So we're going to cut this session off precisely at 10:45. But like I said, we'll cover as much content as we have. Bryce, we're excited for you to be here. I'm going to sign off now, and I'm going to let you take it over. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Chris. Morning, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and jump right in here. So I'm going to talk to you sort of about the business case of going after ADUs, how we develop them, how we design them, some of the problems we've encountered along the way, but also some of the solutions. And then at the end, I'm going to share just kind of a myriad examples of things that we've implemented in our area. So I am one of the executive directors of Haven Ventures. We have a lot of different services. We do real estate development, we do construction, we do architecture, and we also recently started a factory fabricated modular division of our company that I'll also get into in the end as one of our solutions. As millennials have started buying houses, and as younger kids are getting into that as well, we decided to become a certified B Corp as well, which just means that we have a third party verify everything we do, how we hire, how we train, the type of things we put our profits towards. It's just a certification that a lot of people are finding valuable. So that, just as an aside, is something that we see as a differentiator. We go after a lot of different housing types. We go after a lot of different architectural styles as well. We do commercial as well as residential. And we do that because we want to be pulled into solution making rather than just trying to push a solution into a market. We're in Durham, North Carolina, which is one of 3 regional hubs. So we have Raleigh right next to us and Chapel Hill as well. So there's a lot of different types of need, a lot of different types of density, and a lot of different types of zoning. So as such, we do a lot of different types of stuff. We try to be super creative, and we also try really hard to be creative in the types of partners that we'll go after as well. So this is sort of the 3, I guess, standard or typical types of accessory dwelling units that I grew up with. I saw a lot of little tiny sheds in people's backyards. We saw a lot of single bedrooms over garages, often used as just auxiliary spaces for families, and a lot of kind of 1 and 2 bedroom spaces for usually guest bedrooms. I come from Montana and went to school in Seattle. So this type of thing, this furnished room over a garage, we call it a frog, is something that I've seen my entire life. North Carolina is peculiarly averse to garages. Don't see them a lot here for some reason. So the rooms over the garage here was not something a lot of people here used to be familiar with. At the beginning of the pandemic, we also went through our own text changes and our own UDO changes here. And that was sort of fortuitous timing, because before that, there were huge barriers throughout North Carolina, but specifically in Durham, to developing ADUs. So over the course of the pandemic, there's been a wide shift in development, especially in the urban tier, towards the various kinds of ADUs, as people were living in their homes and needing to think about how they were using their own spaces. So with that, I guess these are the, as that demand came in, here are sort of the three major groupings we see ADUs in. There's the sort of internal, traditionally internal model of accessorizing a space. See a lot of just vacant spaces over garages, large attics, unfinished basements. Those are really popular for students. I lived in one during undergrad, and that's been a really popular option for people who are empty nesters, who are looking to rent short-term, or to students. That's sort of the most popular in our area. Then we see the attached ADU. That is typical for someone who wants to do multi-generational living, where they have an adult who they want to move into their home, a parent, as it's become increasingly expensive to have off-site care. That's moved into on-site care a lot more. This is also something that's really popular when two families are wanting to share a space. We see that a lot with our refugee community, where there's multiple families wanting to share an area, but still wanting a little bit of separation. This is something that particularly pertains to them. And then the perhaps more extravagant example of an ADU, but also perhaps the most flexible, is the detached ADU. And this, every municipality defines how these can happen differently. I won't get into the super specifics about that, but this offers the most flexibility. It offers the ability to have this perhaps as a income generating model, where you can rent it on Airbnb, or you can rent long-term. We have a lot of single parent households that live in these. We also have a lot of kids who are moving back to their parents' homes, perhaps from New York or San Francisco or LA or Chicago. We see a lot of those types of families where the kids are coming back to live there, and then perhaps they'll be moving out, or the parents will be aging in place. We'll move into this, and then the kids will switch into the house. So those are the types of ADUs that we've done most of. I don't know if there are a whole lot of other examples, but those are the three groups. So in our area, we've seen some of some barriers that we've had to overcome. I mentioned the zoning and the planning. One particular aspect that absolutely crushed our ability to do ADUs here was the way that the plumbing and the electrical could or could not attach to the main house. Used to be that it had to go have its own independent hookup at the street, which was a insurmountable bill right at the beginning of the build. So now we have the ability to tap into the sewer of the house, and we also have the ability to just put a sub meter on the main electrical meter. So then the only upfit that might be necessary is getting a better panel if it's a particularly old house. Our area also experienced really low demand right in the beginning, because there were very few people who knew what an ADU was. We also found that supply chain was a real big problem, getting just one product here, one product there, one door, just a singular single supply chain implement, I guess, along the way. We also found that it was really hard to get our skilled labor force involved for such small projects. They were charging full infill housing prices for small, teeny little jobs, and that was really hard to get them on board in the beginning. The other big option, and this is why I'm kind of excited for the next person to speak as well, is limited financing options. I think most banks have a real problem handling what the appraisal of a house looks like, or an accessory looks like in conjunction with the house. So oftentimes the big three groups that we see people coming to us with are some type of equity line of credit that they can cash out on, or they just come with cash. The other one that I didn't mention here is just building an accessory at the beginning of an infill development. So this is kind of where I think you guys are as well, but this is how we had to start as well, was we had to really work hard to educate our clients about what an ADU was, why it was valuable, why they should be considering it as an option, rather than just expanding their main house or selling and moving. But we had to educate other professionals, as I mentioned, not just the subs that we work with, but also suppliers, as well as other architects and other builders. We do it all ourselves usually. We're a traditional design build in that way, but we often work with other people as well, working on their designs or sending our designs off to other builders. And then really promoting an ADU as a solution, because really the advocate at the beginning was us. So we had to be promoting ADUs as a really great option for an increased density, for a great income generation, for multi-generational living, for a good option for parents to live with their kids. So we really had to promote that internally and get behind it, so that when we were talking to new leads, that was something that they got excited about as well. So then we really worked hard in the beginning with our city. We have really great connections with our mayor and with several city councilors. So we worked hard to support the policy changes that matter to developers and to architects and to builders. And then I guess finally, one of the solutions to some of those problems are working with real estate professionals to sell it as an option on the back end, and then working also with nonprofits who often have a much larger capacity for thinking outside the box and for wanting to solve certain problems in a unique way. So internally, here are some of the other kind of outside the box solutions that we've come up with. We do builder financing on some projects, especially gap financing for people who can't quite get over the hump. So a lot of middle income families will have some savings, but not have enough to quite do a full new build. So we will do gap financing for certain situations. We also, as I mentioned, work really closely with a lot of nonprofits and work as well with local governments to promote these in public-private partnerships. I'll give a couple of examples of that in a few minutes. And then also, I think the easiest hill to climb is with new home buyers and new home builders as well. Those construction to perm loans will often allow for ADUs. So financing it straight from the beginning is a great solution, as I'm sure you'll hear more about in the appraisal talk next. I'm gonna pause on this one for a second because I was silly and didn't add independent slides for each of these, but I'm gonna share some examples of different solutions that we've implemented, starting with the picture on the top right. This is a new build that we've just started a few months ago. There are in-laws live in the lower left corner of the house, which is a fully functional and autonomous ADU to the main structure, which is to the right and in the rear of the home. This is I believe it's 1,100 square feet, so it's a very large ADU. They wanted a very big kitchen so that they could function and entertain by themselves. But this couple, I believe, are in their early 60s, and the young couple are in their 30s and just moved to Chapel Hill from Chattanooga. So they designed this fresh from the beginning, and this all got to be financed all together, got to be designed intentionally to include this ADU, and is a great example of what that can look like for a single family infill.
Bryce, we're actually still seeing the slide here. I hate to jump in, but we're not seeing your photo. We're still seeing the slide.
are you not seeing the picture in the upper right of the screen?
We're still seeing the upper right picture on the slide.
Yeah.
I got you. Okay. I thought you were trying to show something else. My
No,
mistake.
sorry. Yeah, I have slides later, but I didn't include one independently of this one for some reason. So then in the lower left, that's an example of a 1-bedroom ADU that is ADA accessible, and this gentleman is single but has his mom living with him, but she's in a wheelchair. She also has a part-time caregiver, so you'll see that there are 2 entryways to that unit. On the left is the main unit, all on 1 floor, all accessible to a wheelchair, and on the right there's actually another little area that the caregiver can stay in whenever she comes. It could also be used as a workshop or a shed for storing gardening implements or something. But that's becoming a more popular solution for ADA accessibility. And then in the middle is kind of an exciting example of what stretching the boundaries of an ADU can look like. This is a duplex. The top floor is market rate, which is often a solution that we see here, sort of that mixed income model to make a pro forma work, where the top unit's market rate, 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath. The first level there could be a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath if they wanted to use it as such. However, they also have a dividing wall so that they can create a second 1-bedroom, 1-bath unit at the back, which can in fact be considered an accessory dwelling unit to a duplex. So this unit can be an extremely affordable option that both those first levels were intended to be really. The front one could be market rate for a 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath, but the back one is always intended to be an affordable unit. And then on the lower right, I'll come back to that later, but this is really the bread and butter ADU. This is the one that everybody at the beginning of the pandemic started to ask for, and is really, I think, probably our most in demand. I have a slide about it later, so I'll come back to it. Oh, it's the next one. So what makes this unique and what makes it so valuable is that it's a space that can be rented to a grad student, or in our area, a traveling doctor. And it's also a space that is accessible to the couple who own the primary structure. So the first floor is a workout room. It could be an office. It could be a flex space for kids, a schoolroom. But then the top floor is a 1-bedroom, 1-bath. And that 1-bedroom, 1-bath really is what's in most demand in our area. We're finding it to be a much easier hill to climb to convince people that that's of value, especially people who live within a few miles of a school or a downtown urban corridor. But having that accessory space for their own private use really is something that everybody has latched onto and really, really loves. And then in the upper right's an example of that, where somebody wanted to work in that space. So on the left, she has her artist studio with a nice roll-up door to get the light in. But on the right, so not one over the top, but side by side, is the rental unit. And that kind of is an example of how that can just look in a different format. So this is an example of one of our public-private partnerships. The city of Raleigh had some vacant land that they sold to for $1 to a builder. We won that partnership with them, and now are building, it's actually going to be 9 duplexes now. This was the original intent, was going to be 8 duplexes, but it's now 9, all of which include an ADU built into them, typically off the back of the unit. So this type of partnership makes land acquisition much more tenable, but also helps us produce these units or rent these units at an affordable rate. We also are working in conjunction with one of our area land trusts so that this is in a permanent affordability zone. This is another example of a partnership to remodel a structure rather than build one brand new. This was a disaster house. It was in pretty rough shape. We partnered with an area nonprofit who houses homeless women. We got funding from the city and matched that funding with grant funding, and we're able to stick a ADU on this site for a in-house permanent supportive employee. And then 7 other rooms in the house are now currently housing women who are coming out of homelessness. So it has a large kitchen for everyone to use, but has a separate kitchenette in the ADU. And it just separates it for security reasons, but also so that they can have somebody living on site full time rather than off site, just checking in every once in a while. So this was one of our first ventures into what renovating a home with an ADU that didn't traditionally have one looked like. And then in terms of just the missing middle, this is housing that really maximizes density on a property without having to go through or go to commercial or do multi-level sort of developments. So all of these front 3 lots are in our area considered small lot, which is something that we recently passed zoning on so that we can develop these littler, smaller lots. All of which include an ADU on the back. Now these are ADUs that are modular developments, so we build them off-site and bring them on-site. I'll talk more about why that's a benefit later, but these are examples of ADUs put onto small urban developments. And then here are some other just examples of ADUs in our area. The one on the top right is sort of, I guess, more of a luxurious ADU. It's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, has a screen porch and a nice fireplace. This is actually, I think, substantially nicer than the primary structure in front of it, but is going to be where the couple who own the house is going to move into this structure, and they're going to rent the house in front of them. So they really wanted to push the limits of how great this space could be and how maximized it could be in terms of square footage and usage. And then the lower left is another example of an accessible unit. This is 2-bedroom as well, and just includes a lot of extra amenities for someone in a wheelchair or a senior. And then this is sort of a hot button issue, I guess, but is another solution for an accessory on spaces. And from the perspective of a builder is actually really easy, and that is a tiny house on wheels. And a lot of areas don't allow for these because they can't really figure out how to not make trailer parks happen in their zoning without allowing for these as well. But on the West Coast, up in the Rocky Mountains, up in Maine, Vermont, these are wildly popular. And I think that as we see more shows on TV that talk about these, I think they're becoming a really great solution for especially younger people and singles. So we've built several of these. They're really low barrier, really low cost options. And they can be a really great solution for especially small backyards and rural areas as well. You see a lot of them in rural areas. So modular was a solution for us because one of the I guess not most prominent, but one of the more common problems people have with ADUs is that you're disrupting their space. You're disrupting where they live to build this, whether it's 5 months of digging up someone's backyard or it's spending time in someone's basement or moving through their space up to their attic. A lot of people find that to be a barrier for themselves. So modular, these are developed in a factory and then are shipped to the site. They custom build a little trailer, we drive it in, set it down, and basically walk away. We're only on site for less than a month. So there may be modular developers in your area. I know that Indiana is sort of a hub of modular development. So there are probably a lot of companies that will come into Kentucky. But this is something to consider as a really quick, easy, turnkey solution without having to go through the headache of doing a new build. Here's an example of 2 modules coming together. This is the space I mentioned before that is ADA accessible. And then here's another example of a multi-module development. So this is 3 modules coming together, a little bit more complicated, but this one's in Raleigh now, or will be soon. I have more pictures of all these on our website, which I believe Valerie made or posted somewhere. So you can see more pictures about all these as well. And that's sort of I guess the end of my overview of our the different options that we have. I think that I guess I'll pause now for a second. I've talked pretty quickly through there, so I'm hoping we have some questions that we can dive into one of those areas a lot quicker. I know that I was going to talk for 40 minutes, but I got to 30, so hopefully we can have some back and forth now.
Sure, Bryce, thanks for that. We've had several questions come in here. I know one of them that just came in, you were talking about sort of ADA accessible. And we talk here about sort of universal design and barrier-free entries and those types of things. And specifically here in Lexington, we've done a lot of discussion about aging in place and those types of things. How many of the ADUs that you're seeing, how many of them are designed with that in mind?
I think that early in the pandemic, we saw very little demand for that. And I think that was mostly because of education. I think that now we're seeing a lot more demand coming in from a lot of the retirement communities, people wanting to get out of those dense environments. So I think we're seeing a lot more demand for it now. I would say roughly half of what we're building now is probably, as you say, universally designed. I think that there are a lot of people moving into our area from out of state who are hoping to bring their parents along with them eventually. So that multi-generational living is really becoming pretty critical for us. So I think that designing for single level units it's really easy to include a lot of accessibility features. When you get to multi-level, I think it would probably price most people out of that. But those single levels, especially because you're doing it in the backyard, so you have a lot of ways to easily connect to a porch or a patio or something without huge ramps everywhere, has been a really good solution here.
Great. I know locally that's been a very big issue in us discussing ADUs is those types of considerations. We've had another couple of questions come in here too. So I know you talked a little bit about modular units and some of the benefits for that. Somebody's asked about a specific type, and I don't know if it's modular or prefab or what, but monolithic domes. Are you familiar with monolithic domes? Someone said that they had one on their property and thought it was really good. I guess it's a super insulated, steel reinforced, thin shell concrete structure. So I'm learning stuff today too.
Yeah, I think that actually kind of brings up a fun point, maybe from my perspective, and that is building innovation. I have seen monolithic domes mostly on the coast in hurricane prone areas. I think they're pretty popular in New Zealand as well, where they have pretty heavy winds. But building innovation is often really difficult to implement at a large scale. Doing something new on a $4 million home is often a really big barrier to climb to convince someone that that's a really great thing. Doing something new for an ADU is a much easier pill to swallow for a lot of people. So something like a dome is probably scary for some people because they've never seen it before. They don't understand how they can implement it. Round structures in general tend to be that way because we like right angles in America. But we do structurally insulated panels a lot. SIPs have been around for quite a while, so they're a little easier for people to understand, as well as insulated concrete forms. moving to steel structures in general, using advanced framing, those types of things have been around. They're just not as commonly implemented. We also see rammed earth sometimes. And then the one thing that we've recently been doing more of, and I'm pretty excited about, is it's called green rhino technology, which is building a structure out of foam and then putting a cementitious finish around it that makes it structural. They're becoming more popular in Arizona and in California, but they're really great options for our part of the country where we have really high humidity and really need more outside the box thinking about building, because I think we haven't really been innovating for hundreds of years. So we need to do that. And I think that ADUs are a really great place to start experimenting with that. Doing 600 square feet might cost between $100,000 and $150,000 to build something. That's a lot easier pill to swallow. And it's a lot easier for architects and builders to do in their own property, rather than having to commit to several $100,000 and get banks involved and appraisers and everything. So that can be a really fun solution to really try and think outside the box about what it might mean to do aerocrete instead of concrete forms.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's certainly a lot of innovation taking place right now on a number of different scales, and it's interesting to see which ones will really take hold and start to proliferate throughout the country and in this region too. So I thought that was a pretty interesting question. And there's been a lot of questions too about cost, right? And I'm sure as a build design firm, that's the first question that you get asked, right? Like that we want to, how much is this going to cost? Like, here's what I want, how much is it going to cost? So if we're talking about the difference between a freestanding or an addition that includes a separate unit, right? So an ADU or just a standard addition to a house, talk us through the cost differences between those two different types of products, and then what the cost overall in general for the different types of ADUs might be.
Sure, yeah. You're absolutely right. That's always one of the very first questions. And cost can be a sticking point. So I guess I'll start by saying it helps to think differently about cost than a lot of people do. I think people often think about cost in terms of cost per square foot when they're, especially at the very beginning of a project. And I think that's not appropriate for ADUs to try and compare them to a home. And the biggest reason for that is because you're not comparing apples to apples. Typically, where your cost per square foot comes down in a home is when you have spaces that are really cheap, hallways, extra rooms, dining rooms, bigger living rooms. Those are dirt cheap square footage, but they don't include a lot of the expansion of the expensive square foot. So you're not going to see multiple kitchens or bathrooms getting more expensive. You can't really remove a bathroom, so those expensive square footages stay. So in an ADU, you keep the expensive parts. You still have a kitchen, still have a bathroom, but you limit the cheap parts like dining rooms and huge living rooms. So the cost per square foot on an ADU must necessarily be a lot higher than it will be for a traditional home. So if somebody's going out there talking to a builder who says, yeah, I'm building for $175 a square foot, and then you come in and say, we can build you an ADU for $225, $250 a square foot, the customer's immediately going to be turned off to that. And I think that's it's inappropriate to compare in that way then as well. So the cost per square foot is higher, yes, but that's why. So in terms of, I guess, the different types of costs over different types of buildings, modular will be less expensive. It needs to be for those companies to make it, because you're building at scale. So you can really buy a lot of parts up front. You can really anticipate your supply chain ahead of time a lot better, purchasing in low points, avoiding high times. So modular can be a really great solution, but does offer a lot less flexibility in the type of building you can do and the type of structures you can put in. building at the same time you're doing the main structure. So when you're doing an accessibility, or excuse me, an accessory dwelling unit at the same time you're doing a main structure can make those a lot cheaper as well, because you're able to order all of your parts together. You are also able to anticipate your timeline a little better, so you can really overlap with that main house. And that can be a really great time to have your subs do both at the same time, so you aren't paying those call out fees ahead of time. It's also easier for an architect to just have it all in their system at one time and not have to start from scratch and do brand new plans for a space that already exists, especially if you're doing an addition to a home that may be historic or that may be old or dilapidated. So that cost also can be saved on pushing customers up front to develop those down the road. Now, if that's an option, it's going to be expensive. It will be in comparison to just upfitting a room or something, because you are adding a new kitchen, because you are adding a new bathroom, because that may stretch a septic system if you're on one. Those kinds of costs have to be considered, I guess, on the front end, which is often why it's harder for low-income families to do these without financing availability, because they just don't have $100,000, $150,000 just waiting to be spent on something. So as financing options become available, that's a lot easier, because they do typically, from a pro forma standpoint, we have yet to see one not rent for more than it costs to build. So they're always cash flowing very well.
But it's been, it's a particularly difficult time for housing across the United States in general. And a lot of that has to do with, delay in the supply chains and labor costs and all the other things that go into that. Can you talk to us? One of the questions came in, said, since the cost of construction has increased in the market of delay in some of the supplies, how, first of all, what has that done to the cost? And then also, what has it done to sort of delaying the construction of these? Are you seeing difficulties there?
Yeah, so I guess there's two main camps there. There's the cost of construction from a material standpoint, a supply chain standpoint, and then there's the cost of construction from a skilled labor standpoint. When it comes to the supply chain, there's not a lot we can do about that, right? I can't go to LA and demand that they offload those ships faster. But the benefit to the ADU world is that they're already living in their home. You're not being pressed to get them in their home faster and pressed to use cheaper, more available parts to do that. So we can wait a little bit longer. We can predict the supply chain and delay that start a little longer, and then come all at once when we know we have everything. So we have the luxury of having storage space, so we can be ordering, I don't know about in Kentucky right now, but windows are bananas here right now. We're seeing delays sometimes 20 plus weeks for some suppliers. So that's ridiculous. But if we can store them and order them ahead of time and predict that that's going to happen a little bit more, then we can implement all at once and really save in that way. I guess thinking outside the box about the different construction systems can also help. We often are implementing with materials that we have readily available locally. That's part of us being a B Corp. We prioritize that, so we know who has what when, and we can think about that a little differently than just trying to order the cheapest possible product we can find. And most of our customers will pay for that premium. They really like that we are supporting local businesses in that way. When it comes to the skilled labor aspect, I will often teach at our local technical colleges, trying to get a lot of skilled labor. I think investing in that, and then that doesn't help build ADUs right now, tomorrow, but it helps the industry at large and has to be a focus of the whole community. I know that when I sit in my recertification courses, I'm the only one in that room under 50. And so we're not training GCs. You know, a lot of people aren't thinking outside the box. They're just inheriting companies or they're getting ready to leave. So I think that that's going to be a massive problem for us for a long time. And that's why we started modular, because we can, with far fewer employees in a far nicer environment and far safer environment, we can produce high quality faster. And we can oversee everything that they're doing and have a lot of control of that time. So that was our solution. We threw our hat into that. We bootstrapped that operation and got it going because we, you know, really the big reason is we couldn't find a plumber one day. We thought, crap, how are we going to do this? Well, I know how to do plumbing. I'm just not licensed to do it. Well, in a modular sense, I could be. So that's why we went that road. And we thought that was a great solution. So that can be a great way to circumvent, low labor pool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. Innovation, right? Like that need spurs innovation and thinking creatively about how you solve those problems at hand.
Yeah.
So now kind of shifting a little bit to a more technical question. Somebody has asked if ADUs require their own meter and utility connection. And then sort of a partner to that is that, have you, in your experience, had any encounters attaching on to existing homes utilities? For example, do you use the existing sewer line for the house? Do you attach directly into the sewer? Same with the electrical service and water service.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, that was a problem that was the biggest barrier to building ADUs for the longest time, was having to have its own independent utility hookups. We couldn't stomach that. Most people don't want to pay, in our area, $12,000 to hook up a brand new line at the street and tear up their driveway to do it. So that was a huge barrier for us. So having that in our code and switch in our UDO to allow that to happen, to hook up to the main structure, was enormous. That was when the floodgates opened for us, was how to figure out that utility connection. When it comes to the plumbing, I've never had a problem. Typically, the only time we've ever had to work on anything at the main house is if they have old pipes that need to be replaced anyways, that are probably damaged or dangerous if it's old, rusted out iron. Some of our homes, which are, from the 20s or the, early 1900s, will need work anyways. So there's sometimes, from an inspection standpoint, the inspector will go inspect that main house connection and say, this needs to be updated. But that's really easy to predict upfront. And honestly, for the safety of the home and the homeowner, it's probably better anyways. But when it comes to hooking up plumbing, we almost never have a problem hooking up to that main house. If your backyard is downhill, you may have to pump it out and pump back into that main house, and that can be an expense that you may have to have. But that's rarely been a barrier. Most people understand that expense, so it's not been something that people have pushed back too heavily on. When it comes to electrical, the only time we've had a problem so far is just in the size of the meter itself. Sometimes they're running in for a small house. They might be running in something that was either old or outdated or not appropriately sized for an entire other unit, especially on homes for some reason in the 50s and 60s. Don't know what they were doing in those years, but they were really trying to skimp on their electrical. So we have had to upgrade some meters. We have had to upgrade service a little bit. Not often, but again, that's something that's really easy to predict, really easy to talk about with a client. That's not something that I think a lot of people are, is a barrier for them to understand, that we just need to make this capacity larger. And that is really easy for a lot of electricians as well. Just upgrading that service is not hard. So we've never had a problem hooking into the main house, though, in terms of permitting or inspections or anything like that. The inspections department in our area never even really talks about the main house, even if they have bad drainage or bad, if there's something clearly wrong with the main structure, they won't really go there with us. The only thing they care about is that hookup itself. So we usually bury everything running in the backyard. We usually use that as an opportunity to make better drainage at the same time, especially because we have clay everywhere and it really stinks for drainage, get a lot of rain. So we almost always will do those hand in hand, that yard work component.
Good deal. Shifting a little bit to, how does we talked about in the first, session where we talked about the process for getting ADUs approved. And I know you were involved and your organization involved in some of the ADU regulations. A lot of the things that are talked about are sort of neighborhood aesthetics or how ADUs can fit into existing neighborhoods. So how have you found some ways? How do you address that concern? Is that something that's brought up to you by the property owners themselves as they're designing? How do you take that into account?
Yeah, that's a great question. It has to be done in partnership with the homeowner. Our code, mostly Durham and Chapel Hill's code, do have elements where they ask us to have a similar aesthetic to the home. Raleigh's a great example. I'm sure you could go online and see ADUs in Raleigh where you have a ultra modern, crazy flat roof thing happening behind a traditional cottage. So Raleigh didn't put any restriction on that. And I think that you can think about that in a positive way or a negative way. I think both sides can happen. A lot of the NIMBY people, the Not In My Backyard community, doesn't want anything that doesn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic. A lot of the more modern neighborhoods love that. They love seeing, people thinking outside the box and really adding flair and flavor to their neighborhoods. So I think that happens on a neighborhood to neighborhood basis for us. Some people really care about it. Some people really don't. We are really big proponents of having things that we call contextually appropriate in a neighborhood, because we don't want to devalue the homes around everything, or to excessively overvalue one certain property, and in doing so, aggressively and forcefully gentrify an area in a way that's not naturally occurring. So we think very hard about that, and we, as an architecture firm, are usually the one to initiate that conversation. So when it comes to the aesthetics, we try really hard to do what we call have a conversation between the ADU and the home. So if we're going to do hardy on the ADU, but the front home has a complete brick veneer, they may not talk to one another very well, but there are ways to make the coloring match a little bit. There's ways to make board and batten interact with and engage with a hardy paneled home, for example. So I think that if the home and the aesthetics are working in collaboration with one another, that can be a really great way to really add to the neighborhood aesthetic. But really, it has to happen in conjunction with the owner, because if somebody doesn't want to pay, $200,000 for a fancy ADU that you think you want to build, well, that's not going to happen, right? So, but we also, for example, refuse to build anything with vinyl siding. So we won't do that. If the main house has vinyl, well, we may add hardy that looks similar, but we're not, from a materials perspective, going to downgrade just because it matches perfectly. So in fact, I think it rarely matches perfectly, but they do often have conversations with one another from a design perspective.
Yeah, we had a question come in here, not only about design in terms of the neighborhood context, but sort of designing with the nature, right? The environment of the house. And someone's asked about passive house design. Is that something that you're familiar with? Do you employ those principles as you're designing your ADUs?
Yeah, passive houses that particular certification can be really difficult to achieve in an ADU, especially in an urban context, because there's often extraneous factors that you can't change. In a rural context, it's much easier to, for example, orient a house appropriately or orient windows in an urban context, you often have neighbors and trees and things that prohibit a lot of that. We love thinking about energy though, and thinking about performance in our houses. So really, one of the best ways you can create long-term affordability is by having a home that is super low upkeep and super low monthly cost to the owner. So we design everything with sort of a net zero ready mindset, where we're trying to create that home. We will use some passive house techniques. I think that if you're going to go full passive house and full certification with that, it needs to come from the homeowner. It really, because they need to know what they're paying for and why they're paying so much more for certain elements. We will sometimes in really loud areas design double walls, or we might design with a staggered stud system, and those can be some passive house implements, but we might not get that full certification. Same with net zero. Everything we build is ready for solar, but it's really up to that homeowner to take that $15,000, $17,000, $18,000 step to put solar on their home. But if we design in a way where getting to that space is really easy to do, because we're using LED fixtures and we're using Energy Star appliances, and we're designing with the appropriate amount of insulation, even a continuous insulation on the exterior, metal roofs, slab on grade, those are sealed crawls. That's really how we get there. And it has to really come, the ideas I think need to come from the architects. The builders need to be able to implement them appropriately, and then the customers really need to understand the cost implications, both on the building itself, but also long-term.
That's great. And we're sort of talking about some ways to keep costs down in the long term. We've had a couple questions come in here about lower middle income house, homeowners. And one question in particular is what zoning provisions are necessary to reduce the barrier to entry for ADUs for that segment of the population, but then also how can ADUs be used in affordable housing, let's say.
Yeah, I think it's really easy to implement affordable ADUs at the infill stage. For an owner of a home to think about creating an ADU targeting low-income home or low-income renters, that's a really great place to start with that. We work in partnership with a lot of people in our area, especially land trusts who have permanent, long-term affordable aspirations for their homes, and as such often have partnerships with funding that we can't access in the private sector. So that's one great way to target renters. Now, when it comes to the homeowner themselves, that's a much bigger question, and I think part of that needs to be answered by the financing industry, because figuring out how to get financing on an ADU is a big barrier, and I think will be for a long time. We are trying really hard at a policy level to make it appropriate for small companies to have sort of enterprise funds available, so that we can issue internal, I wouldn't call them a mortgage, but maybe like a line of credit internally, or a private a note maybe to people. That's why we do the gap financing, but that allows other people to get unique funding. That's very much at a state level in our area. That's where they're doing that type of work. So that's maybe a conversation for a different context and a different person, because I'm not an expert in that. Those are just things that we're kind of working on. But then when it comes to the homeowners in themselves and what locally, I think it's about density, and it's about lot size. So we've recently passed some zoning changes in our area, and mostly as text changes, that allow us to do smaller homes than normal. We also are able to build them in the urban tier in particular, which is where most low middle income families are in our area. We're able to build in backyards that didn't allow for it with outdated setback requirements. And maybe outdated aesthetic requirements, as well as that density. So, most when you're talking about from a city level, I think density and future use planning is really where that comes in.
That's great. And sort of talking about the financing gives me a good opportunity to plug our conference day 2. Our first session at 8:30 is going to be Milton Manolis, who is from Loan Depot. He's the retail national renovation sales manager, and he's going to have a lot of insight into the financing of these as well, to supplement some of the things that Bryce has brought us as well. So if you've got questions along those lines, I would encourage you to stick with us for tomorrow's sessions as well. So we've got just a couple more minutes left, and the Q&A has been very active. So Bryce, everybody's very interested in the information that you're bringing. Awesome. So we'll just tackle one more real quick. The balance of demand that you see for the different types. Interior conversion versus standalone versus new construction. And I'll add one more on there too, the modular. What's the balance of demand that you see for those different types?
We thought that it was going to be a lot of interior conversion type of work. That when we first got into thinking of ADUs as something we were going to offer, we thought that was going to be huge. And it hasn't been. I talk to one person a month, maybe, and that's usually basement conversions. But that hasn't really been in demand here. I would say the thing that we hear about most often is that 1 bedroom over a flex space, especially for people working from home, because so many people are right now. And so, even as kids have had to be, potentially being at home and studying, I would say that's the thing that we have heard most often, but I think as well that that's very pandemic specific. So I think that as we wane into endemic and we're not seeing as much craziness and unpredictability there, I think that 2-bedroom, 1 bath or 2-bedroom, 2 bath is really going to become the thing that we hear most in demand. I would say size-wise, we rarely ever have anyone asking for more than 800 square feet. So I would say 95% of what we hear about is probably 550 to 800. Mostly leaning towards that 550, 600 area. We see a lot of that. And I think that designing for ADA accessibility, that universal design, that's well over half of what we're seeing. So I think that that's important for people to think about as well. Modular as well is something that after we educate people, gosh, we're just seeing a ton of business from that. So yeah.
Well, great. Well, like I said, Bryce, the Q&A has been blowing up, and we've got a lot of questions that we weren't even able to get to. So I appreciate you spending your time with us again. This is Bryce Jahner. He's with Haven Construction out of Durham, North Carolina. He's been very kind to spend some time with us this morning. So unfortunately, we're going to have to move on to the next session, though we could have this conversation just for hours and hours. But I want to encourage everybody to join our next session, the Louisville and Lexington ADU conference. It's going to be Abdul Malik, who's the owner of A Quality Appraisal. So, we're going to learn how to appraise ADUs. I know it can be a difficult subject, especially with something that's new to market. So that's something we're looking forward to, his expertise out of Portland, Oregon, and a lot of experience with ADUs.